Alright, Vikings! We finally swept the Bears today! Alright! Now we're officially in the playoffs! And they're first in the NFC North. Yeah! Alright, here's the stats. Here's the passing for the Vikings. Kirk Cousins had 17 carrying and 20 attempts and 1 touchdown. Nick Mullins had 11 carrying and 13 attempts and 1 interception. The rushing, Alexander Masson had 10 carrying and 54 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dalvin Cook had 11 carrying and 37 yards. Ty Chandler had 6 carrying and 20 yards. Keeney Nwangu had 5 carrying and 13 yards. Nick Mullins had 4 carrying and 8 yards. Jalen Reagor had 1 carrying and 5 yards. And Adam Thielen had 1 carrying and 4 yards. Alright, the receiving. KJ Osborne had 5 receiving and 117 yards. Jalen Naylor had 4 receiving and 62 yards. CJ Ham had 4 receiving and 47 yards. Justin Jefferson had 4 receiving and 38 yards. Jalen Reagor had 2 receiving and 17 yards. Keeney Nwangu had 1 receiving and 16 yards. TJ Hawkinson had 1 receiving and 16 yards. Irv Smith Jr. had 3 receiving and 14 yards. Adam Thielen had 2 receiving and 8 yards. Alexander Masson had 1 receiving and 6 yards. And Dalvin Cook had 1 receiving. And Adam Thielen had 1 touchdown, of course. Now the defense. Chris Boyd had 3 tackles and 1 assist. Patrick Jones, too, had 3 tackles and 1 assist. Jandon Sullivan had 3 tackles. Cameron Bynum had 2 tackles and 1 assist. Duke Shelley had 2 tackles and 1 assist. Josh Minolis had 2 tackles and 1 assist. Patrick Peterson had 2 tackles and 0 assists and 1 interception. Kyrus Tonga had 2 tackles. Eric Hendricks had 1 tackle and 2 assists. William Kunihu had 1 tackle. Troy Dye had 1 tackle and 1 assist. Juji Villain had 1 tackle and 1 assist. Jordan Hicks had 1 tackle and 1 assist. DJ Wandham had 1 tackle and 1 assist. Ryan Connolly had 1 tackle. Nizi Wamdu had 1 tackle. Theo Jackson had 1 assist. Danielle Hunter had 2 assists. Keeney Wangu had none. CJ Ham had none. Harrison Phillips had 1 assist. Dalvin Tomlinson had none. Kick returns, no kick returns for the Vikings. Punt returns, Jalen Reagor had 1 return and 4 yards. And the kicking, Greg Joseph had made 3 field goals. And punting, Ryan Wright had 35 yards. Yeah. Alright. Now the stats for the Bears. Nathan Peterman had 114 yards and 1 touchdown and 11 carrying and 19 yards. And Tim Boyle had 2 carrying and 8 yards and 333 yards. The rushing, Khalil Herbert had 10 carrying and 50 yards. Velus Jones Jr. had 1 carrying and 42 yards and 1 touchdown. David Montgomery had 7 carrying and 21 yards. Nathan Peterman had 2 carrying and 7 yards. Tim Boyle had 2 carrying and -2 yards. And alright, the receiving for the Bears. Cole Kmet had 4 receiving and 57 yards and 1 touchdown. Chase Claypool had 2 receiving and 29 yards. Velus Jones Jr. had 1 tackle and 28 yards. 1 receiving and 28 yards, I meant. Dante Pettis had 2 receiving and 19 yards. Keneal Harry had 1 receiving and 7 yards. Brian Pringle had 1 receiving and 5 yards. Equanimeous St. Brown had 1 receiving and 3 yards. And Treston Ebner had none. Khalil Herbert had 1 receiving and -1 yard. The defense for the Bears. Joe Thomas had 10 tackles and 4 assists. Harrison Hand had 9 tackles. Nicholas Moore, who had 7 tackles. Elijah Hicks had 6 tackles and 4 assists. Jaquan Brisker had 5 tackles and 5 assists. Greg Storman had 4 tackles and 4 assists. DeAndre Houston Carson had 3 tackles and 5 assists. Greg Storman had 1 interception. Justin Jones had 3 tackles. Travis Gibson had 2 tackles and 2 assists. Matthew Adams had 2 tackles. AJ Thomas had 2 tackles. Julian Holmes had 1 tackle and 2 assists. Raman Watts had 3 assists. Quadin Muhammad had 2 assists. Riley Riff had none. Chase Claypool had none. Dominique Robinson had 1 assist. Mike Pennell had 1 assist. The kick returns for the Bears. Velus Jones Jr. had 4 returns and 82 yards. Punt returns, Dante Pettis had 1 return and -2 yards. The kicking, Rio Santos had none. And the punting, Trenton only had made 1 or 2 field goals, I think. And punting, Trenton Gill had 111 yards for the punting for the Bears. Alright, here's the stats. Alright, here's the total yards. The Vikings only had 482 total yards, and the Bears had 259 total yards. And the passing yards, the Vikings only had 341 passing yards, and the Bears only had 141 passing yards. And the rushing yards, the Vikings only had 141 rushing yards, and the Bears only had 118 rushing yards. Now the yards per play. The Vikings only had 6.8 yards per play, and the Bears only had 5.2 yards per play. Alright. Now here's the good news on Sunday Night Football. The Lions already eliminated the Packers. Yes! Woohoo! Alright, so long, Packers. Note, if you're a Packers fan, then opinion handled. But still, the Packers are not going to the playoffs this season. Finally. Heck yeah. But the bad news is the 49ers just blown out the Cardinals. No. Now we're ranked 3rd spot in the NFC. Now, because of you 49ers, since you've blown out the Cardinals. Note, if you're a 49ers fan, then opinion handled. Well, yeah. Now the Vikings, all they gotta do is to beat the New York Giants at home in the playoffs in the wild card round. Would that be nice, huh? Since we beat them in the regular season by a field goal. So yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed it. So yeah. Bye everyone.